Okay, what we're going to talk about today is we have basically two talks. We're going to talk about Cynefin, which is a model or template for facing complexity, for gauging complexity. And then I also have a physician suicide presentation. That's going to depend on you all. If we get through Cynefin and you want to keep going, we can go, or we can just call it quits and then have the physician suicide talk later on. But we'll jump into Cynefin for sure. We're adult development coaches. That's what we do. We trend people toward higher levels of adult development. And there's all sorts of benefits we get from that. And I say we purposefully, because when we do the work, Scott, you talk about this, that when we do the work, it kind of challenges us to do it as well. So we're not just ushering our clients through it, we're actually doing the work ourselves. So I purposely use the word we. But the benefits that we get, the foundational benefit, and we harp about this all the time, is more complex thinking. We take our clients' thinking, and we take it from subject to object. They're in it, and then we help them go objectify it, and then we apply it to levels of adult development. But there's many more benefits as well. One is greater insight, and it could be argued that insight is actually kind of the gateway into more complex thinking and higher levels of adult development. It's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of thing. We gain better leadership ability. We don't make our clients smarter. They're already plenty smart when we get our hands on them. It's these other qualities that are essential to leadership that we're fomenting. We increase relational capacity. And what's nice about the work we do is it tends to serve our clients in any context. Wherever they're relating to another human being, it tends to help them relate better. We develop the ability to perceive emotional conflict as opportunity rather than feeling victimized by it. We stretch the ability to embrace multiple truths without being too freaked out by that. We gain greater cognitive and emotional agility, which is really important in almost any context where you're facing complexity. And then we learn to tolerate situations that present us with paradox, contradiction, and oppositeness. Okay, so these are all of the benefits, and there's probably more that I'm not listing here, that we get from doing adaptive change coaching, but it kind of brings on the question, so what? So we do all that, and we have all of these things that we can supposedly do better. How do we apply it? And that brings us to the Cynefin model. Now, Cynefin was designed, created, whatever, by a fellow named David Snowden. And I don't even know when it was, decades ago. Mostly, I think, designed for industry, but extremely helpful in healthcare situations because healthcare people, especially healthcare leaders, face incredibly complex circumstances. Cynefin basically starts with a horizontal axis and a vertical axis. If you look on the right-hand side of the horizontal axis, there is something called the ordered realm. This is when things are ordered, just as it's named. So when you're facing an ordered circumstance, dynamic, relationship, event, whatever, when you're in the ordered realm, you can assume there's some kind of logical order to what's going on. Therefore, you can rely on rational choice, intentionality is going to serve you, all these types of things, because you're walking in the ordered realm. You're facing an ordered circumstance. On the other side of the spectrum is the unordered realm. Unordered circumstances, unordered dynamics, relationships, whatever. When you're walking in an unordered circumstance, it's like somewhere, there's a purpose to it, and something productive is probably going to come out of it. It's just at the time we as mere mortals are having trouble grasping, or we tend to have trouble grasping what's going on when we're walking in the unordered realm. Now, the vertical axis, there is the agile realm. When you're on the vertical axis, it's really quite simple. The agile realm basically indicates that there are many different choices, many different good choices, many different bad choices, and everything in between. And at the bottom of the vertical axis is the fixed realm. And when you're in the fixed realm, basically you really don't have many choices. You have a limited spectrum of choices. So we have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis, and that provides us with 4 quadrants, of course. 4 different types of circumstances that we face, especially in leadership. The first quadrant is the known quadrant, known circumstances, knowable circumstances, complex circumstances, and chaotic circumstances. So let's go through them each one by one. The known quadrant, or when you're facing a known circumstance, cause and effect will be repeatable, perceivable, and predictable. A hospital example of this is keeping the emergency, or not the emergency room, but the operating room sanitized. If you don't do it, your infection rates go up. It's not rocket science, it's pretty straightforward. So cause and effect are repeatable, perceivable, and predictable. So when you're in a known circumstance, you can rely on legitimate best practices, standard operating procedures, process reengineering, click lists or checklists, and all these types of things. The mode of operation when you're faced with a known circumstance, or especially when you're leading in a known circumstance, is to sense what's going on, identify the categories that things are in or should be in, and then you respond. So pretty straightforward. Sense, categories, response. Pretty kind of no-brainer stuff. Pretty straightforward. Now the next category that's more complicated is the knowable category, knowable circumstances, knowable quadrant. When you're facing a knowable circumstance, cause and effect will be separated over time and space. A hospital example for this is for decades, clinics and hospitals and hospital systems have been hiring doctors and paying them and managing them and all the processes and procedures. And then all of a sudden, we've got all these APPs. We have these advanced practice nurses, and they've got prescription authority. They're kind of walking around like doctors. So what does that mean? How do we deal with that? How do we structure their pay? All sorts of questions. And the answer is we really don't know. We'll figure it out, but we won't know for probably a year and a half, 2 years. So that is a knowable circumstance. Cause and effect are separated over time and space. And so lots of times, organizations and leaders will bring in consultants when they face a knowable circumstance. So they'll bring in the consultants, or they'll have their in-house people analyze and reduce, break things down to their constituent parts and kind of try to figure out what's going on. They'll do scenario planning. This is likely to happen. Might not happen. What do we do if this happens? Systems thinking, there's buttons and bells and whistles, and we've done it before. Let's kind of apply past experience and parallel experience, and essentially just kind of make your best guess when you're in the knowable circumstance. It's just a fancy way of saying make your best guess after you've analyzed. But the mode of operation in the knowable circumstance, especially for leaders, is to sense what's going on, analyze, and then respond. Sense what's going on, break it down, and then respond. The main point here, as we're looking at this, now that we've got the known and the knowable circumstances kind of illustrated, is that they're both on the ordered side of the spectrum. So when you're in a known or knowable circumstance, you can assume there's logical order, or you can assume there will be. Therefore, you can rely on rational choice, intentionality, and desired effect. And this is where we come in. So as adaptive change coaches, this is the most important point of this presentation. We human beings are hardwired to want everything to be on the ordered side of the spectrum. Okay? We're hardwired to want things to be predictable, in order, have some kind of order to them. So we want that, we long for that, we yearn for that. Sometimes we'll stamp our feet and have temper tantrums because that's not the case. But here's the rub. Many, many things are not on the ordered side of the spectrum. They're on the unordered side of the spectrum. And once again, this is where we come in. And that brings us to the complex quadrant, complex circumstances, complex dynamics, complex events. Cause and effect do not necessarily repeat when you face a complex circumstance. And the reason that's the case is because there are too many agents of influence, too many circumstances, too many factors, too many relationships. Now, the hospital example for this would be someone who's leading a cohort of physicians. You're leading a cohort of physicians. That's an extremely complex circumstance. Just the word physician means many different things. It doesn't mean one thing. There's a lot of different qualifications, a lot of different the temperaments of each physician, their emotional makeup, what's going on in their lives. There's the internal influencers. You've got the patients and the peers and colleagues, and then you've got the external ones, payers and policymakers. You could go on and on. That type of circumstance is an incredibly complex circumstance. It requires certain things. The one that I think will resonate with us most is perspective filters. Different ways of knowing, not different things to know, different ways of knowing. So when we take our clients and we go from subject to object and we apply it to the levels of adult development, those are perspective filters. Those are different ways of making sense of your world. So when you're facing a complex circumstance, it's extremely important to be able to be conscious of the filter you're using, the way you're making sense of the world, and to know that there's other ways to make sense of the world. So perspective filters, okay, in a complex circumstance. You can also use safe to fail experiments, complex adaptive thinking versus technical thinking. Ronald Heifetz has that classic quote, the biggest failure in leadership is when we apply technical solutions to adaptive problems. The biggest failure in leadership. So to apply complex adaptive thinking, you need to be able to access the higher levels of adult development, or you'll struggle. If you're in the socialized mind, if you're kind of trapped in the socialized mind or below, you'll just have trouble doing adaptive thinking. It's just harder. When you're in a complex circumstance, oftentimes, especially when you're leading in a complex circumstance, oftentimes you'll be able to choose the direction, but you won't necessarily be able to control the outcome. And so the mode of operation when you're facing a complex circumstance, especially if you're leading in a complex circumstance, is we seed the environment, make it likely that certain things are going to happen. Then you probe, you get in there and start doing things. And then patterns start to arise. You sense what's going on with the pattern, and then you respond. So you seed the environment, probe, sense, and respond, and then be ready to repeat because you're on the unordered side of the spectrum. So, but the main point I want to make is that human beings are just hardwired to be on that ordered side of the spectrum. But many things that we run into, especially in healthcare, especially leading in healthcare, are on the unordered side of the spectrum. So they need this type of work. They need the adaptive change work. And then we go to the chaotic circumstances, once again, requiring higher levels of adult development. Cause and effect, there's not really any perceivable relationship. This is when you got people flying planes into your skyscrapers. And a hospital example for this would be if you have like a natural disaster and your ER is just being overwhelmed and the power goes out. That's a chaotic circumstance. So when you're facing a chaotic circumstance, or when you're leading, especially when you're leading in a chaotic circumstance, you can rely on stability-focused interventions, basically just getting in there and trying to get some kind of control over what's going on, get some kind of stability. Enactment tools, which is just a fancy way of saying do something, get in there and do something. Crisis management, so you basically just kind of get the right people, try to get the right people in the right places and all of the resources that are needed. And this is the most interesting thing about the chaotic quadrant. The mode of operation, especially for leaders, is to start with acting, which I thought was really strange when I first learned this material, is you act. So the thinking behind it is you don't let perfect be the enemy of good when you're involved in a chaotic circumstance. Get in there, you got to do something, and you got to do it relatively quickly. Not get too hung up on whether it's the exact right thing to do or not. So you act, then you sense what's the response you're getting from the action, and then you respond. So you act, sense, and respond, and then once again, you're on the unordered side of the spectrum. So you have to be willing, ready, and mature enough to be able to repeat that. Once again, I want to drive the point. This is where we come in. Okay, human beings are just super hardwired to want things to be on that ordered side of the spectrum. I know I am. And what we help people do is to develop the levels of adult development and the psychological and emotional agility to walk on this unordered side of the spectrum, to walk in the unordered realm, especially in the complex quadrant. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please visit us at fernepc.com.